3, 2, 1 minutes so I can keep track of you. Okay, all the way on my right is the Prime Minister, Jonathan Sanders. He's an Emmy and Edward R. Murrow award-winning reporter. He's been a Fulbright scholar. He's a professor in the School of Journalism. He also has experience years ago working with the Rosenbergs, which had to do with treason, as most of you know, the atomic bomb secrets being passed to the Russians. The member of his team is Melissa McCall. She's a native of Brooklyn and a graduate school student in the School of Journalism right now. She's also an attorney. To my left is the head of the opposition, leader of the opposition, Michael Zweig, who's been a professor of economics at Stony Brook for many years. I actually go back to when he was a student and I was covering Stony Brook. I think it was 1968, which is frightening to realize.
I was on the faculty, I was honest.
He was already, wasn't a faculty member. And then to his left, a member of the opposition is Dean Miller, who's the director of the Center for News Literacy here at Stony Brook, a former editor of the Idaho Falls Post-Register, and a man of many interests and talents. We'll start with the Prime Minister, Jonathan Sanders, making the government's position clear. He'll have 7 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, Mr. Whip, distinguished opponents from the opposition, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, dami y gospoda y gosti Long Island. There is something rotten in Denmark. We are living in a surveillance state. A program of the NSA called Boundless Information collected 3 billion pieces of communication data on Americans in one 6-month period. Mr. James Clapper, the head of the NSA, has been lying to the American people. On 12 March 2013, he was asked at a Senate meeting, does the NSA collect any type of data on millions or hundreds of millions of Americans? Clapper's reply was succinct as it was dishonest. No, sir. We have the President of the United States, Barack Hussein Obama, signing a court order to have the records, the email records, the phone records, all communications of the Associated Press found and discovered so that they can see if they can find out who is leaking information. We have, by consensus of opposition and my own discoveries, most leaders of the American press believe that this administration is the most closed, most secretive in American history. And since most of you already have made up your minds that these are bad things, let me give you a practical illustration. You don't want the government listening to what we're saying? Take out your phone, open the back, pull out the battery. That is the only way, short of putting it in a freezer, that we can be sure that the government does not use our phones as a microphone to listen into what we're saying. They can control this remotely. How do I know this? My friends in the KGB told me this was one of the best pieces of technology that they were ever handed by American spies. And in fact, that is the heart of the matter. Are there necessary secrets for any society to have? Technology does not have a conscience. People have conscience. People make the difference. Do you believe that there are things that we need to do to keep ourselves safe? If there is something rotten in our state of Denmark, we cannot fix it while we are being attacked by foreign nations and people hostile to us. Just yesterday, while we were all, well, some of us, a few of us, celebrating Congressman Zeldin's ascension as a great representative of Long Island, the U.S. government launched a drone in Yemen that killed the head of Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, along with officials of the province of El Baida. Is that a bad thing? Could he have been planning to kill Americans? He had already killed a number in Yemen and was planning. Without certain limits of secrecy and foreign operations abilities, we cannot fight the evils that are abroad in our land. And I would argue to you that with people like Jim Risen from the New York Times, waiting to go to jail for disclosing information, with James Rosen, a longtime friend of mine at Fox News, a wonderful, fair and square and balanced news organization. We cannot undo the wrongs abroad in this land under one of the most repressive presidents we have had, Barack Hussein Obama. And that the person who is endangering our lives, endangering our ability to rectify the wrongs in our society is very evident. He is Edward Snowden. Mr. Snowden has disclosed secrets that are necessary for the United States to foreign powers. He has given away our ability to leverage foreign policy situations. This summer, we were in a weak position because of the feckless policies of Barack Hussein Obama and his cohorts to have any influence on Mr. Putin. He has given documents to Sweden on how the government there is spying on Russia. He has given documents to the world on how the U.S. uses cyber attacks as an intelligence weapon. He has made it clear how Al-Qaeda tracks down and shoots our drones. He has pleaded with Brazil that he will help them with security against the United States in betrayal of his oath of allegiance. He has sworn an oath when he was in the CIA. He should know better. In 1846, in July, Mr. Thoreau was in jail for not paying his taxes. The philosopher and friend Ralph Waldo Emerson went to visit him and said, "Thoreau, what are you doing in jail?" And Thoreau looked at him and said, "Waldo, what are you doing out?" We need to bring Snowden home so we can discuss questions of privacy, so we can discuss his betrayal of American values, so we can discuss how he has given our enemies comfort. Thank you, sir.
Now here from the leader of the opposition team, Professor Michael Zweig. He has 8 minutes.
Good afternoon, everybody. We're here to debate a question which we have not yet heard addressed. The question is whether Edward Snowden should be brought back to America and tried for treason. We heard absolutely nothing in what was just said to address that particular question. Now, I would like to address that particular question. And I would like to first begin by telling you what treason is It is the only law, it's the only violation which is explicitly defined in the United States Constitution. And it says, treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. That's what treason is. We have heard nothing in what was just said to indicate in any way that Edward Snowden gave comfort and aid to our enemy or levied war against the United States. So there is no case for treason that has been presented here today. That's point number 1. That's Article 3, Section 3 of the United States Constitution. What war was Edward Snowden waging against the United States? What did he do to give aid and comfort to our enemies? We have heard nothing. Not one single thing. So let's keep that in mind. We have heard no evidence, neither from our distinguished Prime Minister, nor from anybody in the United States in authority that has indicated a single thing that Edward Snowden has provided to anyone that has constituted waging war or giving aid and comfort to the enemy. So I would say, on the proposition in front of us, that the clear vote is negative. Now, we see that, Al-Qaeda has some information from us. You don't think that Al-Qaeda knew that we were tapping their phones? Why did Osama bin Laden tell his people never to use phones? Why did the United States go and find and locate and kill Osama bin Laden without the slightest piece of evidence retrieved from any of these search procedures that Edward Snowden has brought to our attention? So, and on the question, well, we'll get back to aid and comfort of the enemy, but let's move on here. So let's look at what Edward Snowden actually did do. What he did was he took some documents, quite a few documents, millions of documents, and he gave those documents not to Al-Qaeda, not to the Soviet Union or Russia, not to China. He gave it to 2 journalists, Glenn Greenwald from the Guardian and Laura Quatros, and they also communicated that to the Washington Post in the United States. That was not giving anything to any enemy of the United States. That was not giving aid and comfort to any enemy of the United States. That was providing information to journalists. Now, my colleague here will go more deeply into the process of journalistic ethics and what's going on, but I would just like to point out that the Washington Post and the Guardian never published anything without checking it first with the US and the British government. They did not broadcast everything that was given to them. They did not unilaterally decide what they were going to do with this information. Everything that they published was vetted through the United States government and the British government. Sometimes the US government disagreed and didn't want it published, but it was published. Sometimes the government said, don't publish it, and it wasn't published. So the idea that this was some irresponsible broadcast is absolutely untrue. Now, Snowden looked at this information as he was seeing the illegality of it, and we've heard a reference to James Clapper's testimony to Congress, which was an out-and-out lie, that the US was not engaged in this activity. Snowden knew the truth. Before Clapper made that testimony, Snowden had 10 times offered through the official channels of the NSA his concerns about what was happening. And it was rejected at every turn. He was, when he saw that, and when he saw that the Director of National Intelligence was openly lying to Congress, he said, I have to do something because the US government is violating the Constitution, it's violating the law, it's endangering democracy, and I cannot stand by. As it says at the MTA and the New York City subway system, as all of you probably know, if you see something, say something. And that's what he did. And he did it only when he exhausted the other channels that had been available to him. Now, He wasn't the only one frustrated with what the NSA was doing in their lives. Senator Ron Wyden, who was on the Senate Intelligence Committee, was very concerned. The FISA court itself, which authorized this program, reported secretly, which we now know, that the NSA had way overstepped its bounds and had extended its reach far beyond anything that the FISA courts had approved. So this was information that Edward Snowden had, that the government was lying about in public,
2 minutes.
was clamping down in private, and that every person sitting in this room should know. Not only should every person here know, but President Obama himself said, after it became public, that this was a good debate for the American people to have. We could not be having this debate without Edward Snowden. And this is a debate that's good for democracy. Edward Snowden is good for democracy. So let me just complete my little piece of this right now and talk about what is at stake here. Well, I would say there are two things at stake: security of the country and the question of democracy. So let me say briefly on security. Ask yourself and think about this. Are you more secure with a police agent on every corner and with a police spy listening to every telephone call you make? Are you more secure with money, $53 billion last year going to that?
1 minute.
Or are you more secure with a job, with an income? Are you more secure with health care? Are you more secure with an economy that has a functioning infrastructure? What is true security for the American people? I believe it is not having a police agent on every corner. That's not security, that's tyranny. That's a very important thing. Second point, I think that the very nature of democracy is at stake here. What Edward Snowden did was he saw that democracy and open debate was being choked off, and he wouldn't tolerate it. He's a brave man. He stood up and said, we cannot allow this to go forward. You, sitting in this room, right here, you sir, you need to know this. We need to debate this. Not whether Edward Snowden is a traitor, whether the United States government is violating and trampling on our rights. That's what we have to debate. That's what we have to know, and that's what Edward Snowden opened up for us. Thank you very much.
Government Construction, Melissa McCall. She has 8 minutes.
Good afternoon, everyone, gentlemen. So as you're listening to me, I want everyone to be very clear on something, a few things. The first thing I want you to be clear on is that Edward Snowden is a criminal. Yes, we live in a democracy. We live in a system of laws that help keep our democracy together. It's simple. Edward Snowden wrote the law. So my colleague mentioned that he didn't hear anything about treason. So the first thing I'm going to talk to you about is treason. So treason, he gave you a chapter and verse of the Constitution. Treason has two elements to it. The first element is levying war against the United States. And then there's a very important word that comes after that, or. You don't have to necessarily meet both elements, you need to meet one element. Or adhering to the enemy. There are two elements to when it comes to adhering to the enemy. The first one is adhering to the enemy, and the second one is for the provision of aid and comfort to the enemy. Now the Supreme Court has said that this element requires both overt and specific intent to betray. So the question that I want everyone to ask themselves as you're considering our arguments here is, did Snowden commit any act, any overt act that provided aid and comfort to the enemy? Now, of course, my colleague said, he didn't. All he did, he merely gave some documents to the press, which he was entitled to do, and in that capacity, the press has freedom of speech. They can certainly publish it. However, we're not here to consider what the press did or did not do. What we're here to consider are Edward Snowden's actions. So to satisfy the overt requirement, it's not necessary to show that he attempted to assist the enemy. He's not required to show that it was substantial, complete, effective, or successful. The government does not even have to show that the enemy used the information or that it was received. All they have to do is prove that the recipient of the aid or the comfort was an enemy of the United States of America. Everyone knows what happened on 9/11. Sad, tragic, 13 years later. It's safe to say we are still embroiled in a war on terror, whether you want to believe it or not. I think the events that are going on in the world right now would support that. And so this idea that Edward Snowden didn't know what he did when he published, he helped to make public this information, simply does not hold any water. My colleague mentioned the fact that, I think his precise words were something along the lines of, didn't bin Laden know that we were tapping his phones and weren't we still able to capture him? What I want you to bear in mind is that a 1998 Washington Times story disclosed that bin Laden used a satellite phone to communicate. And then in the 9/11 Commission report that was published subsequent to 9/11, found that this leak to Al-Qaeda signaled to their senior leadership how to change their method of communication. So it wasn't anything that it was in the public. So this idea that they're not disclosing, putting information into the public sphere is not giving aid to the enemy, again, simply doesn't hold any water. And so the other thing that I want everyone to keep in mind, we were talking about the Constitution, when you're considering treason, is this idea of whether or not there's been a formal declaration of war. And so what you have to keep in mind right now when it comes to treason is that the Constitution is essentially silent on whether or not a formal declaration of war is required. So we have to look at the war on terror. And so right now we have sworn enemies. There are people who, you look at what's going on in the Middle East right now, you look at what's going on around the world, there are people who are sworn to destroy us. And so, sorry, I'm a little nervous. So there are people who are sworn to, how much time do I have left?
We have 2 minutes. 3 minutes.
Okay, so there are people who are sworn to destroy. So I'm just going to move on to my next point. The other point that I want everyone to keep in mind, although we do live in a democracy, the general public does not have an unrestricted right to access classified information. Information is classified for a reason, and part of that reason is to keep us safe. Snowden had provisions that would have allowed him to be a true whistleblower. I suspect that an argument may be raised that he was a whistleblower. He was not a whistleblower in any true sense of what a whistleblower is. Going to the media does not fall within the definition of whistleblowing. The government has, it's called the Intelligence Community Whistleblower Protection Act of 1998. It protects employees of federal intelligence agencies as well as contractors for any of those agencies who disclose information directly to Congress. The other fact that I want everyone to keep in mind is that for the 113th Congress, according to the rules of the House of Representatives or the 113th Congress, our elected officials have the ability to disclose classified information. So arguably, if there was information in there that you needed to know, that we needed to know about, arguably our elected officials would have told us. And we have an obligation to elect those people who are going to keep our interests safe. And the final thing, the final set of facts, because I don't want this to be about emotion or necessarily about how you feel about things. I would like this to be a fact-based inquiry, or look at this in terms of facts. Edward Snowden deliberately took this position so that he could gather information on the NSA and then leak it. He started off with the CIA in 2006. In 2007, he was stationed in Geneva. He resigned in 2009. He went to work for Dell and was stationed at the NSA facility until early 2013, and he stayed there for 12 months. And then he has said that he took a pay cut thereafter so that he could specifically work at Booz Allen in order to gather information about the NSA surveillance, and then leak this information. And so I think what all of these facts add up to is intent, which is what you need to consider when you're asking yourself if he is actually guilty of treason. This is not about emotion or his contributions to democracy. This is about guilt or innocence, and should he be brought back to face the consequences of his actions. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now hear from a member of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker and ladies and gentlemen, I wish to ask you to tolerate my presence here. I am not the dean. I am merely a man named Dean. I am the half-bright colleague of the Fulbright scholar. But regardless of all that, facts are stubborn things. In fact, the knowledge of bin Laden's sat phone was disclosed to journalists by the Taliban in 1996. The disclosure of his sat phone use is one of the great urban myths of our time. This is no espionage case. This is no treason case. This is a case of clearly protected exercise of the right to a free press, a right guaranteed to Ed Snowden, a right guaranteed to us, the majority of Americans who have repeatedly told pollsters, we are glad we know what Ed Snowden told us. People like Ed Snowden are the reason it has often been said that American democracy is the worst possible form of government unless you consider the alternatives. Only when we shake off the stupor of illusory security do we rise to the challenge inherent in this Constitution's central premise that the truth will keep us free. Not without inefficiency and waste, not without pain, not without sacrifice, but free. Free means free. In our soft and easy lives, it is easy to forget the radicalism that is at the heart of the U.S. Constitution. Dissent is not betrayal. Dissent in America is patriotism. And citizen dissent is only meaningful when it is based on facts and information. The framers, whether they were deists or agnostics or Episcopalians, were not believers in the blue-eyed, blonde-haired, Jesus-maundering kind platitudes. They were scholars. They, even the non-believers among them, honored the fiery rebel prophet who had the ill manners to say that it is his followers should afflict the comfortable and comfort the afflicted. From the first major press ruling in 1931, the Supreme Court has tolerated all manner of outrageous publication on the theory that the one thing worse than irresponsible speech and distribution is government suppression of speech and distribution. It's not an appeal to authority. It is not a fallacy for me to quote the framers. Today, we are celebrating the givers of law in all of their radical glory. And I mean to make you uncomfortable about the framers. Jefferson didn't say that the tree of liberty requires cool water regularly delivered through a well-engineered irrigation system. He said that that gnarly oak needed the hot blood of patriots. Madison didn't stitch some dainty needlepoint that said, "Tut tut, naughty colonials, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." In fact, Madison said the opposite. He said, "Let her buck, cowboy! Some degree of abuse is inseparable from the proper use of everything." In no instance is this more true than that of the press. To the press alone, checkered as it is with abuses, the world is indebted for all the triumphs which have been gained by reason and humanity over error and oppression. American democracy did not arise from safe theoreticians in the academy or patrician liberals bestowing kindness on the masses. The framers hated with a hot passion the tyranny of the British monarchy, and they were sworn enemies of despots. They bequeathed to you, not the barons and dukes of the press corps, to you individuals, they bequeathed the awesome power to know, and to say no. That was unequaled in history. These Renaissance men, soldiers, scholars, and statesmen, hated war for the way that it inevitably corrupts governments, always has, always will. They did their best to prevent us from repeating history in case we did not learn it. The structures of our government reflect the framers' fear that giving the executive unbridled war powers has always been the means by which republics failed. Endless and ill-defined war gives tyrants both the justification and the means by which to oppress the very people government is supposed to serve. It's no accident that the framers bracketed our rights between treason in the Constitution and free press and free speech. Bold though they were, the framers bracketed these rights. Mr. Snowden's behavior falls safely within bounds, not violating the law of treason, squarely in the zone of patriotic dissent, who exercise their concomitant right to know and to speak. You had the right to know these things, which is why the majority of you, even though you're unsure of the technicalities, are pleased that he did it.
One minute.
Protection of Edward Snowden's right to speak and distribute his facts would not be judicial activism. It would be originalism. The man on our money, the father of our country, warned that government is not reason, it is not eloquent, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. The framers gave you a whip and a bucket to keep that monster in check. It's called the First Amendment. Ed Snowden exercised his First Amendment right to tell people what is wrong with this country right now and to challenge them to do the right thing. It is your unabridged right to know what is done in your name and to speak for or against it. If that be treason, this be not America. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Now hear from the leader of the opposition. He has a rebuttal for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We've heard some really astounding propositions from the opposition. Astounding from the government. Astounding opposition number one, that we cannot protect our freedoms while we are fighting evil in the world. Really? We cannot protect our right to speak We cannot protect our right of privacy while there is evil in the world that the U.S. is combating? Really? I don't think so. Do you? I don't want to buy into that. Now, we've heard that Ed Snowden took this job at the NSA in order to gather evidence. That's been said. He never said it. There is not a shred of evidence that it's true. There's not a shred of evidence that he has actually conspired to spy. It's just not true. Although it's said. Well, let's see. Now, we've heard that Ed Snowden is not a whistleblower in the true sense. I'll tell you, we aren't really talking about whistleblowers here, but if we're going to talk about it, in a true sense, he is. Maybe in the most narrow legal sense, he might not be covered by whistleblower laws. That may be. But in the true sense, this here is one whistleblower that we need to listen. This is some guy who's stood up and told us as a country, as a people, and the world, that the United States has been on a course and on a path that is dangerous to us, that is dangerous to the world. And that is the true whistleblower. Whatever the legalities are that we are not here debating, because we're here talking about treason, and we still haven't heard anything about treason except another astounding proposition. Can't believe how many astounding propositions there are here to deal with. How's this? Giving aid and comfort to the enemy means doing anything that the enemy might use for its advantage. Well, now let's see.
2 minutes.
Let's just see. One of the things that the enemy, let's assume about war powers and all that stuff, that Al-Qaeda is an enemy of the United States. And one of the things that Al-Qaeda says is that the United States has played a negative and oppressive role in the world, in the Middle East, and all over the world. That's one of the things they say. They say many other things. Now, there are students in my classes here, some, and they've heard me say that. They've heard me say in class, talking about the history of the United States and its role in the world as a capitalist, truly capitalist empire, global capitalist empire, that the United States undertakes policies and programs which result in what the CIA has called blowback, that it creates enemies around the world.
1 minute.
And I can document how that happens and what the role of the United States has been historically and is still to this day. Now, if Al-Qaeda wants to take a clip out of my lecture and stick it up on one of their YouTubes with Arabic subtitles, am I an enemy of the people? Am I a traitor? If that's true, you better watch out. If that's true, if that's all it takes to be a traitor in America, we got some heavy lifting to do to secure this as a democratic society. And we just heard that proposition from that side of the table, didn't we? We just heard that proposition. Anything that's done to give aid and comfort to the enemy is treason. Well, I'm sorry, that cannot be true. We must never allow that to be true, especially when it comes in the context of a claim that says, from the same side, you cannot protect your liberties while there's evil in the world. What kind of evil is that? Thank you very much.
I think we're finished.
No,
you're about. Yes.
Yeah, rebut. You got 5 minutes, I only have 4. 3 minutes. Well, that's true.
Glenn Greenwald,
Good book. Good book.
Good book.
Read that book.
won a Pulitzer Prize. We're not talking about journalists. We are not talking about good journalists. We're not talking about great journalists. We're talking about Edward Snowden. In his book, Mr. Glenn Greenwald, who spent a lot of time with Snowden, said after he got his Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer certification in 2001, He started as a security guard at the Center for Advanced Study of Languages at the University of Maryland, comma, a building secretly managed and used by the NSA. The intention, he said, was to get top secret clearance and thus get his foot in the door and then do technical work. He was a hunter-gatherer of information.
And then do what?
Technical
what?
To
work.
that point?
Technical work. Yes.
Thank you, technical work.
Technical work. Gathering intelligence. He also says, knowing about the difference between what goes on inside this country and outside this country. Knowing about secrecy of technical means of intelligence. How do drones get tracked? When you leak the CIA secrets, you can harm people. I wasn't going to do that. But when you leak the NSA secrets, you only harm abusive systems. I was much more comfortable with that. He's a hermaphrodite. He's half right. Talking.
Point of honor on behalf of hermaphrodites.
Talking about what's going on in the United States. Talking about how Verizon is compromising with the NSA is perfectly acceptable. When he discloses PRISM, a system of massive intelligence gathering of foreign nationals that happens to be based because Google and Yahoo are based in the United States, and lots of terrorists use them because they're free and they're massive and they're cheap, and not all terrorists are as smart as Osama bin Laden. And in fact, it's their stupidity that keeps us happy and safe. Disclosing PRISM is too much. A large definition, a global definition of treason is extreme acts against one's nation. Mr. Snowden was intoxicated with his own extremism. And by disclosing facts of national significance that go outside the United States, that have to do with technical means of finding terrorists, he has betrayed his country. It goes along with the intent to interfere with armed forces or to promote the success of enemies. That's the Espionage Act of 1917, which
Point of
is...
order, we're not talking about espionage. Point of
We're
order,
not talking
that's
about
new information and a new argument. It does not belong in your summation.
does not belong... Okay, we're not talking about espionage.
That's correct.
We're not talking about espionage. We're not talking about espionage.
We have less than a
So,
minute.
if we're not talking about espionage, ask yourself what Mr. Snowden is doing in Moscow. Ask yourself...
That's also point of order. We have not talked about what he's doing there. That is a new point of argument.
Espionage, let's see.
Point
We're
of order.
talking about
Point of order,
war.
Mr. Chair, please clarify the matter.
Stay within the bounds of the arguments that have been made.
Thank you.
War. Espionage. War.
No. We have
If
not
we
talked
give
about
away...
it. Point of order. We have not talked about espionage. We have not talked about Russia. And I ask the honorable gentleman to stick within the rules of this debate.
If we are giving away documents about foreign policy operations, and our ally Japan is in a state of war with another nation, are we betraying our treaties? What you see in Mr. Snowden is a betrayal, not inside the country on your privileges, not trampling on your First Amendment rights, not trampling on your Fourth Amendment rights. Those don't exist outside
Point of
the
order,
United
time is
States.
up.
Take some questions first and then vote?
No, vote
Let's vote first. All those who think the government made the case
That's them.
for treason over here, raise your hand.
Let me get a picture of that.
You should have asked before we came in, Jim.
All those who think the opposition has made the case,
That's
raise
us.
your hand. The opposition has the votes.
We do have some.
Okay.
The point about Russia,
Professor Sanders wants to know, how many of you changed your mind because of the debate?
Good question.
Okay.
There was some.
There was some. Okay. Good.
Good question.
We're going to go to Q&A and then,
You could ask how many got something clearer though. You did a lot of clarifying, I think.
that's good.
okay.
Maybe you didn't change our minds.
We have a few minutes, we can ask questions of the panel members.
So,
Just raise your hand.
to your question, ma'am, about Russia, it's a really interesting part of this mess. Because the reason that actually we have students who research, do we have the student who researched this? The really interesting thing about the reason he's stuck in Russia, he was not going to Russia. He was on his way somewhere else, and we pulled his passport, and he's stuck there. So that's a really interesting fact question. I can't wait to see litigated.
You know, Dean, I believed that until his girlfriend, who is a dancer, joined him in Moscow. Guess where the second best place in the world to be a dancer is? Moscow. And the first best place is New York.
Speculation.
All right, question over here.
When I ask how you personally feel about this subject, the callers and I can debate it.
As a journalist, I'm not comfortable sharing my...
Time. I'm a journalist. I can see it's complicated.
Question. Stand up so we can hear you.
I'd like to ask each member of the panel, the fact that he went first to China and then wound up in Russia, what does that say about whether or not he is really not a hero? Why didn't he just stay and go to trial, present his material,
For starters,
and let the jury and the country decide whether he's a traitor or not?
Hong Kong ain't China, for starters. Hong Kong is not, the rules are different in Hong Kong than they are in China.
At the moment.
At the moment. At the moment that he went, it was a very different place. Beyond that, I think you know, in the situation that he's in, you go where you're safe. I said that this is the kind of reason that people hate this system of government, is because people like him are
Why
protected.
wouldn't he be safe in our judicial system?
Well, I'll tell you why. There actually is a good answer to that question. And the answer is that the charges that are being brought against him that he anticipated, right? I mean, obviously when he left, or when he was contemplating doing this, he didn't know what the charges were, but he anticipated a charge of espionage because the Obama administration has been very adamant in pursuing whistleblowers and leakers. They have actually prosecuted more than the entire history of American prosecutions. The Obama administration has brought more charges than all the rest of the administrations combined. But when they bring charges like that, you can't confront the evidence. The evidence itself becomes secret. The evidence itself becomes out of bounds, so that he did consult legal advice before he left. And he was told, and no one has contradicted it, that would he come and stand trial in the United States, he could not mount a defense based on the material that we've been talking about here today, because it's classified, it's secret. And so, unlike the Ellsberg case, where there could be an open discussion, in this case, there could not be. And he is negotiating, or his lawyers or whoever, is negotiating to come back. But the condition that he demands for coming back and standing trial is having the opportunity to confront the evidence and to discuss and to disclose what led him to do what he's doing and what he did. And that the U.S. government at this point will not allow, and at this point, he's not ready to come back and just go to jail for the rest of his life in a secret trial. That's not at all anything to do with the obligations of civil disobedience.
Okay, anybody want to add to
Yes. First, let me say I've lived both in Hong Kong and in Moscow. And Moscow's a lovely place, and Hong Kong can be a lovely place when the humidity's not bad. He has said, I wanted to spark a worldwide debate about privacy, internet freedom, and the dangers of state surveillance.
Yes.
I am not afraid of what will happen to me. I've accepted that my life will likely be over from my doing this. I am at peace with that. I know I'm doing the right thing. So, why isn't he back here?
Because he wants to have an audience in court to testify as to why he did what he did.
No, I think it's worse than that, actually.
Well, go ahead and think.
I think that the reason, if you read Der Spiegel, the interview with him in Der Spiegel, he is afraid of being taken to Guantanamo prison
You betcha.
and waterboarded.
You betcha.
Because over the last years, the rule of law does not rule here. That's what he's really afraid of. That's what he's afraid of. And that's part of what's rotten in the United States right now. But that does not obviate the fact that he has given away secrets that are of use to America's enemies.
More questions? Stand up so we can all hear you.
Okay, this is a little step to the side of that, but do you think that the lopsidedness we saw in the audience today and in the United States possibly as a whole has to do with anything about like the glorification and glamorization of espionage and spies in like culture, like movies and books?
Does everybody hear that question? No. All right, we'll repeat it for you.
The lopsidedness of the vote here today, does that have anything to do with the glorification of espionage and espionage culture?
In the media and then popular culture.
In the media, popular culture?
Like in movies, we see it all the time, like the glamorous spy and in books and such.
I know a lot of spies. A lot of my former students are spies. Jessica Stern, the great expert on terrorism, of who the movie The Peacemaker is based, teaches at Harvard's Kennedy School, is a former student of mine. It ain't that glamorous. It ain't that glamorous, and I think first of all, if we were in another part of the United States, we might get a different reaction. And I think part of it is the lack of exposure to the broader world, to being out on the front lines with American soldiers who are risking their lives, not knowing what's going on with intelligence operations. There's a big difference between inside the United States and foreign affairs and foreign policy.
Okay, Dean, do you have something you want to say?
Yeah, I'm scurrying to try and find this, but you know, when the Patriot Act passed, there was only one U.S. Senator, Russ Feingold, and in the House, very few stood and voted against the Patriot Act. And the interesting thing is, Jim Sensenbrenner, the author of the USA Patriot Act, is one of the loudest voices calling for Clapper to be prosecuted for lying to Congress about this, which is really significant because if you recall, the Patriot Act allowed sneak and peek, it basically allowed the FBI, CIA, etc. to break into your house, search your house without a warrant, warrantless wiretapping, warrantless searches. That was a very different America than today. So I don't know if it's a pop culture effect so much, Meredith, as it is where we are. Jonathan's right. If we were doing this in Idaho, where there's the one guy, ironically, the one guy in the House who voted against the Patriot Act, probably the vote would have been the opposite. So that, you know, that libertarian strain doesn't carry over to respect for people like
Okay, we have time for a few more questions?
You have 5 minutes most.
All right, 5 minutes most. Let's get some questions. Why don't we get 2 or 3 questions at once?
Hi. My question is for both sides. Do you think there is a great divergence between the interests of the American people and the American state? I think I know the answer for the right side, but I'm curious as to Professor Sanders' answer.
Okay, just mark that question. I want to get 2 more questions. Anybody else? Oh, okay, then go ahead with this question.
Is there a divergence of interest between the American people and the American state? Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the American government, in its feckless ineptitude, is in charge of keeping us safe. And we elect foolish people to run our government. Condoleezza Rice was handed the information about threats to our government in August before the 9/11 attacks. The president did not pay attention. She did not raise a storm. Worse, we have been spending since 1946 tremendous resources on a group of people who work in a building called the Pentagon that could not even defend itself against a couple of guys who had a crazy idea. Is this stupidity or is it treason?
Let's get any more questions? Right here, okay, go ahead.
It'll be there one word on. We're a full-service operation.
Oh, over here. Andy, do you have a question? Right over here. Okay.
Hi. What did you
Stand up so
say?
everybody can hear you.
What did you mention specifically about the Pentagon Papers? You said it very quickly. I couldn't catch whether or not you're comparing it, whether or not it's the same thing. Can you clarify that?
It's a bad comparison because Dan Ellsberg was not prosecuted because the Nixon administration's behavior was so criminal that the judge said, you are coming to court with unclean hands. Of all people, you cannot point the finger of blame at Ellsberg. Ellsberg was, in fact, ready to do the time. But when it came out that the Nixon administration had directly hired people to burgle his psychiatrist's office to try and get embarrassing facts about him, that was considered so manifestly criminal that there was no way the prosecution would go forward against Ellsberg. So it's not a great comparison, actually. He got off because the other side was so crooked.
Well, there's another aspect to that, and that is the Pentagon Papers were essentially a history of the involvement. They had very little operative information other than giving good advice to people like General Westmoreland on how to lie to the American press. In other words, there was nothing in there that had to do with today. They did not tell the Cambodians how we're about to bomb them illegally. They did not tell them where the bombs were going to go. They did not give them maps of how we were going to bomb them so they could shoot down our B-52s. But the information that is disclosed in PRISM of how and why we track Al-Qaeda missiles and things is operative information. It's being used today.
Well, the operative information in the material that Snowden took is not necessarily open to the public without the screening of the American government. Now, the U.S. government will look at the story that the Washington Post or the New York Times or the Los Angeles Times or any other newspaper wants to publish, and they will sit with the editors and say, this sentence over here, we don't want you to publish that sentence because we think it will violate security and jeopardize the safety of American operations. And if the government can make that case, which they often can, American publications will not print that information.
But they are under no, this is where my partner and I differ a little bit. The American press is under no obligation to do so.
Yeah, but they do so.
They do it as a matter of course, but it is not like there's a law that says there's a censor who gets to read the story and strike out sentences. Responsible journalists go in and say, so this is what we're going to report, what do you say to that? And presidents have multiple times said, what the hell are you thinking, right? But it's not, there's not an obligation to do so.
My dear comrades, America is not the world. There are other publications. There are other languages. There are deposits of information that will be erupting and coming out soon. Yes, we vet things when they go and they touch on national security here in the United States. Sometimes we do them correctly, when the New York Times was persuaded not to give information about an invasion of Cuba, or maybe that wasn't right. We got our asses handed to us. Maybe it would have been good if it leaked. But there's Der Spiegel, there's Pravda, there's Izvestia, and then there's the wonderful world of the Chinese press, the Xinhua news agency, controlled by the Central Committee of the Communist Party of the People's Republic of China. And then there are a whole bunch of loonies who are doing videos and things for Al-Qaeda. So it's not just we are privileged in the world. We have a First Amendment. We have a Fourth Amendment. It don't work that way out there.
Or here.
Let me thank the panel.
Well, thank you all.